Today's lesson is how to draw glass or anything else that's transparent and is really shiny. So for today, I've chosen this glass jar. So before we get started, make sure you've got all the tools you need for the drawing part of this. I prefer to draw in a mechanical pencil. Again, having two rulers, two straight edges of any kind is going to help keep all your curves nice and parallel. I always have another piece of paper so to help me make sure that my lines are straight up and down and straight across. And of course, an eraser of some sort. Okay, so step number one is we always have to figure out the math, and I realize it's a little bit more difficult to do when you're not in the same room as the object. Often in art class, you would come up, you'd take your fingers and you'd figure out how tall or how wide things were, or else you'd measure them. So what I've done is I've gone and measured it for you to give you an idea how big this is. So it's 8 centimeters from here to here, 13.5 centimeters from here. Also, if you're just looking at this piece of paper that it's on, you can see about the size that you need your drawing to be. Okay, so I'm now going to get my piece of paper. And step number one is to lightly sketch out while you're kind of figuring out your math. So I'm just going to kind of put a little piece of tape on here so it doesn't roll off on me. Okay, so here's my, for my drawing, I'm gonna go ahead and I figured out, I just used a ruler and figured out. So, reminder, I am drawing way darker than I want to just to make sure the camera picks this up. You want to keep your lines really light, especially look at how light this jar is. There's not a lot of shading on here, so we want to keep our lines as light as we can. So for my math, I know this is how tall it is, this is how wide it is. Again, if I wasn't using a ruler, I would be using my fingers to say how wide is it compared to how tall it is, and it's a bit bigger than half. So I always find half, and then I always go, is it bigger than half, less than half? It's a little bit bigger than half. Okay, so now that I've done that, you need to lightly sketch it out. Okay, now let's just look at the details here. So first of all, there is a part that goes straight down at the top. And again, I'll give you the math for that. It is just a little bit less than 2 centimeters. So I'm gonna take my ruler. This is 2 centimeters. I'm just gonna go just up a little bit from the 2 centimeters and mark that off. And what else do we need to know? Oh, down here, it goes from flat, it curves out to right there. So we need to know where the flat stops. And again, I'm just gonna measure that. And again, 2 centimeters seems to do it. So once again, I'm gonna take my ruler. I'm gonna mark off 2 centimeters right there. And at this point, I've got the math on the one side. I need to do it across the page. So this is where your other piece of paper, I call it the pink paper. Obviously you use what you need to use. But remember, this is the best way to make sure that your horizontal lines are horizontal and your vertical are vertical. And remember, this is the trick. You take that extra piece of paper and you align the edges. You make sure they match right where you want them to be. So here's that little mark. And I'm just going to do this. And now I know where the curve is going to start on both sides. And I need to do the same thing across the top. I need to know where that straight part stops up here. So once again, you guys, these are great little tricks I have figured out. It's the advantage of having an old teacher. I've been doing this for a long time. I have figured out so many tricks to help And this is definitely one of them. Because remember, these are blocking lines. If our blocking lines aren't straight, then we can't, our curves are never gonna be straight. Okay, and then at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and fix up my top line. So I just lightly sketched it in there to make sure everything was gonna fit on the page. Your stuff doesn't have to be exactly in the middle of the page, but you know, close is nice. And so I'm gonna go ahead and make that a nice straight line, and I need to do the same at the bottom because I just sketched it in and now I need to take a bit more time. So once again, if you have a spare piece of paper, anything with a right edge, and I match my edges, then we're gonna make sure that I get a nice straight line going across the bottom. Okay, I'm gonna do the same thing with my vertical lines. And go from the sketched lines. This time I need to make sure they're nice and straight. So I think my biggest flaw when I'm drawing is I'm not always as patient as I should be, because I like shading. So I tend to rush my drawing and not take quite as long as I probably should, because I just like to shade. So I'm being very careful here to make sure all my blocking lines are correct before I keep going. So let me just kind of go down in a bit. So you can see I've got the line now for the top's going straight across, I've got this line going straight across, and I've got the bottom, and I've got this part right here, so I know where it curves in. So let's look at the top for a minute. So it can get a little complicated. We have a line going here, it's not actually parallel, this one's not parallel, those are screw tops. We're frankly gonna ignore this guy and this guy. But we are gonna put this curve in right here. Let's just do that one. So we've already, that's what this line is right here. And I've got the line there, just I've drawn it pretty light. Just darken that a little bit. Darken this. We're almost done the math part, but if we look at our jar, you notice that this part is skinnier than this part. So what happens here is, let me just do this. You can see it bends in a little bit here before it goes straight up. So from here to here, I'm just gonna make it a little bit skinnier on this side. So I'm coming in from the top a little bit, and then I'm just gonna put a curve here. Now, whatever we do on this side, we need to do the same on the other side because we want our jars to be nice and symmetrical. So again, I'm just gonna use a scrap piece of paper instead of a ruler, and I'm gonna put a dot here and a dot there, and I'm gonna slide this over. And that's how I'm gonna make sure that we go in the same on both sides. And I'm gonna do the same, I'm gonna use the straight piece of paper to figure out how far did I go down for the curve. So my blocking line was here, the bottom of my curve is here, and I'm gonna slide that piece of paper over right here, give myself a dot. So now I know that my curve needs to go from there to there, so it needs to go from here to here. And we'll just try to do the same curve on two sides. Might take you a little bit of time. I said I rarely get it right the first time. I usually have to try a couple times. And we have to do the same thing on the bottom. It's just a way more gentle curve. And let's check my math. So does the bottom goes in way more than the top did. So if I look at where that bottom goes in, you can see it goes in even more than the top. So we need to do the same thing. So it goes in, looks like about there. So I'm gonna go straight down my page, and I'm gonna give myself a little bit of a mark. For those of you that like to follow along with the math, I was just a little bit bigger than 1/2 centimeter in up here. And down here at the bottom, it's 1.5 centimeters is how far I've gone in. And this one, it's not really a curve. It's more just like an angle. And then we're just gonna kind of curve it a little bit here. Same thing on the other side. I'm gonna do exactly what I did up there, is we're gonna take our blocking line, and instead of using a ruler, I'm gonna use a scrap piece of paper. And I went in that far, right, on this side. If I slide it over to this side, I'm gonna give myself a mark, and now I can join these 2 lines here. Okay, and that gives us the shape for our jar, and then now you can proceed to erase all the blocking lines before we proceed to draw the form.